This might be the end of credit cards as we know it, at least the physical ones. During the Visa Payments Forum in San Francisco last week, they announced a bunch of things. Overarching themes were digital identity and generative AI, and they were also trying to close the gap between in-person and online shopping. Outside of those big concepts, there are a bunch of things that are going to affect us as consumers, and also some other businesses. If anything, it feels like Visa's out for blood, and we might see a pretty dramatic shakeup in the finance landscape. We'll get into it, but some of the ideas that they're pushing aren't necessarily new. In a lot of ways, they are pulling from the big graveyard or similar companies who just didn't have the war chest to compete. But now they're putting the full strength of Visa behind it to make it work. But yeah, we'll talk about what they're working on, companies at risk, and why you might be happy as a Visa shareholder. Big favor, hit the like button to help with the algorithm. If you know anyone else that might benefit or be interested in this, then share this with them. The first one and the most straightforward is tap to everything. They're pretty much taking what they've already done and expanding it. Europay, MasterCard, and Visa started on this back in 1996. That's also where the acronym EMV comes from, in case you're curious. The first contactless cards came out in Visa Asia in 2004. In 2008, they were pretty much everywhere, and I definitely remember my parents freaking out. Nowadays though, they are pretty standard pretty much everywhere, and no one's scared to use it. They're taking this and now expanding it to other verticals. Tap to pay, confirm, add cards, and for peer-to-peer. Let's say I want to go get lunch. Most places either operate off an old POS terminal, or they use something new like a Square or a Clover reader. For all of these, there's three models: leasing, selling terminals, and full service solutions. For example, if you were to buy a Square terminal, that's $280, and you're paying 2.6% for card payments with their machines. Square, which has since rebranded to Block, is not a small company. They have a market cap of $44 billion and pretty solid numbers in the last 12 months. It depends on how Visa wants to play this, but technically they can cut Block out of the whole process. For online shopping, tap to confirm makes a ton of sense. It's pretty much an extension of text messages you might get to confirm that you made the purchase. Tap to P2P sounds like the consumer version of the first one. If you go out to eat with someone and you want to pay your cut of the bill, you're probably using Venmo or Cash App. If it's your first time paying them back, finding them on Venmo is a pain. Why can I not just type in what I owe them and then tap phones? Cash App is owned by Block, so once again, they're in the line of fire, and Venmo is owned by PayPal. Main takeaway for the first one is that they want to own more of the process and cut out the middlemen, and if it does work, then some companies are in trouble. One of the more interesting ones is going to be passkey. As technology has developed, more transactions are taking place online. Right now, online transactions account for about 19% of all retail sales, with it going closer to about 25% by 2027. With that though, you do have a lot more fraud. In fact, online payment fraud is 7 times higher than in person. Okay, so how do you solve for this? You can have text to confirm, but if someone steals your phone and keeps it unlocked, then there is still a lot of risk. What's a lot harder to steal though is your biometrics. For passkey, they're going to confirm your identity and authorize online payments with a quick scan of your biometrics like a face or fingerprint. The idea of passkey is that it replaces the need for passwords and one-time codes, making the purchasing process a lot more streamlined, but still secure. Basically confirming identity without interrupting the checkout. On their end, it's kind of a win-win. Less fraud is good because they do pay out for that, and it forces other people that are more scared to use the internet to feel more comfortable. Also, less resistance in the checkout process means more transactions. A big question though is whether it's going to be risky for us as consumers to have them use our biometrics. The thing to know is that it's not Visa owning and holding your biometrics, but they're working with third parties, and the ones that are pretty much focused on this as a space and as a company. A big factor too is that biometrics are becoming more common for pretty much all companies. For example, for our flight from LA to Paris earlier this year, they already had this. Delta doesn't store it themselves, but they work with a third party. Same thing with Amazon, where at Whole Foods, they have Amazon One, where you check out and pay with your palm. Also, a lot of apartments are using retina scanning, so it is becoming pretty normal. Factor in that if you're someone that travels internationally, then the US government and a lot of other governments already have all your biometrics. When you come back into the US, they scan your face to make sure that it's really you and not someone pretending to be you. One big fear I have though is vendors getting hacked. So for example, even AT&T, which is a gigantic company, had leaked over 70 million users' social security numbers. Imagine if a hacker was able to link that with your biometrics. Even worse is the fact that there are a lot of sites online that are pretty much a repository of all your critical information. So things like your name, address, prior addresses, and all your phone numbers. This brings us to the sponsor of today's video, DeleteMe. If you travel, one thing to be careful with is data privacy. The last thing you'd want is for a criminal to know your home address and that you're on vacation. One thing I do is delay posting. So for example, last month we were in New York, but on Instagram, technically we are still in New York. Side note, follow me on Instagram at Ask Sebi, where we post trip highlights. 40% of renters post about their trips while they're traveling, and 2/3 of burglaries happen when you're not at home. One way that I've tackled this is DeleteMe, and that's why I'm happy to partner with them today. When I used to Google myself, I'd find a ton of websites with my phone number, birthday, and address, and even if you're good at this stuff, other sites might not be. Best case, you get robocalls and scam emails. Worst case, you're at risk for identity theft and fraud. You can try to remove all of this yourself, but it can take hours, and these sites don't make it easy. DeleteMe was super easy for this, and that's why I've been using them for more than a year. For example, this quarter, it reviewed over 8,000 listings that match my name, confirmed that none of them were me, and it's working. Contrast this to earlier quarters where I'd found 30 listings. The best part is that it keeps working in the background, so I don't need to stress about it. On average, DeleteMe finds and removes over 2,000 pieces of data for a customer in their first 2 years, and they've removed over 100 million pieces of data for all their customers. So if you want to protect your personal information, then check out joindeleteme.com/asksebi and use promo code SEBI for 20% off their US consumer plans. Thank you to DeleteMe for sponsoring today's video. The last one that might be a game changer is flexible credentials. More than half of card users want the ability to access multiple accounts with a single credential. They're working on something that will allow a single card product to toggle between multiple payment options. The cool thing to me too is that you can actually set parameters and also choose whether you want to use debit, credit, pay in 4, which is their buy now, pay now, and also points. Lots to digest, but they're already live in Asia, and they're launching this summer in the US with Affirm. On a side note, as a Token fan, Lord of the Rings fan, I love their marketing. One card to rule them all. Visa wants their card to be your precious. So you have one card, and the idea is that you can do multiple things. On the surface, it feels pretty risky, but Visa already does debit and credit cards. It's kind of like they're just combining both. Beyond that, they are doing a lot of things on the back end to minimize risk. For example, they're incorporating biometric authentication methods that we talked about earlier. So in that sense, you're going to have a card, but for larger purchases and transactions, you probably do have to open up the app and look at it to authenticate your face. It kind of sounds annoying, but they already do this with larger purchases where they send you a text message. In general, there are a lot of risks with texting as two-factor authentication because you could socially engineer it. The main risk being that you get SIM swapped, and also why a lot of people don't use texting for two-factor authentication, and why most people, and probably people watching, use Authy and Google Authenticator. There's also 2 other parts to the security. Transactions are tokenized, so even if you do use the card, they don't see your exact credit card number or your debit card account. Everything's encrypted and securely transmitted. That way the actual card details are not stored by the merchant. So if I use an all-in-one card at the sushi restaurant, they don't have my bank details. If anything, they're probably going to use dynamic tokens. So each token's generated to be unique for a specific merchant or a payment scenario. That way, even if a token is compromised, it can't be used for anything else. The same reason why you might use virtual cards. If I'm trying something and I don't trust a vendor, or if it's a trial, I'm going to use privacy. This whole big company is built around this on the business end with companies like Ramp. So for that one, you can generate a card for each specific vendor or merchant, and that way, even if it does get hacked, the card can't be used anywhere else. Main point being that even though it sounds super risky and that there's a lot of downside, there's a lot of things that they're doing to protect you and a lot of things that already exist. If anything, I feel like biometrics are going to help a ton of fraud. So for example, one of my cards was stolen and they went on a spending spree. It was a new card that was delivered, but I guess it was pre-activated and it wasn't me doing it, but someone had a lot of fun at Walgreens. Even though I wasn't liable, I don't like the idea of a criminal winning. $300 or $400 is a ton of money for Walgreens, and there probably would have been a biometric thing that pops up. Also, an all-in-one card isn't even a new idea. In this case, it's kind of like Apple taking something that's worked and making it better. People have thought of it, they've launched companies, and there's a giant graveyard. In a lot of ways, it's a V1 startup idea because it makes a lot of sense, but it's very hard to execute unless you have the right relationships. And in this case, Visa does. CoinCard is arguably the biggest loser in the space. The idea was pretty straightforward. You'd store your card details on a mobile app and send the info to the coin card. You could also press a button to swap between the cards. They ended up raising $15.6 million in total for the idea with a Series A in 2014. When people got the card in hand though, they were pretty disappointed. A big reason being that it didn't work most of the time. It was something that had a lot of hype and people were excited, but it just didn't deliver. Kind of like the credit card world's version of the Humane Pin. At the time, it wasn't just a shutdown of a single company, but an entire category in the payment space. Fast forward 3 years to 2018 and we saw the Fuzz card launch. So for that card, hackers were able to steal credit card data. Even worse is that they were able to use the card for crime. They would steal credit cards and debit cards and load them up onto the card and use them. The benefit too is that the card didn't show your whole name. So if I stole a card from, let's say, Louis Winthrop III, here it would just say Louis. With the normal card that has a name on it, I think the cashier would be a bit more sus and might ask for my ID. The latest iteration is Curve, which is going surprisingly well. They're also not a small company and they've raised over $1.3 billion. At the same time, Visa is Visa and they can put the full strength of their company behind their card. Factor in that Visa has all the partnerships and they can make sure that everyone works with them. It also sounds like Visa is adding a bunch of features from the Curve card. So for example, automatic routing of spend based off MCC code. I'm pretty sure that's what Visa means when they say that people can set parameters. If it's dining, it automatically uses one card. If it's a pharmacy, something else. Visa's stock price has done pretty well for the last 12 months, and I think this can be an interesting catalyst for their growth to get to that $1 trillion market cap. Before we start to see the all-in-one cards, if you are looking for a Visa card in the meantime, then consider the Chase Sapphire Preferred or the Chase Sapphire Reserve. For example, the Sapphire Preferred is offering 75k points instead of the typical 60k points. You get this after spending $4,000 in the first 3 months. There is a $95 annual fee, but 75k points is worth at least $750 into your Chase checking account, or as a statement credit for the card for your purchases. If you travel, the points could be worth more than $900 through the Chase travel portal and upwards of maybe $1,500 if you want to do expert mode and transfer your points from Chase to airline and hotel partners like Hyatt in Singapore. If you don't like the card in year 2, you can downgrade it to a no annual fee option like the Freedom Flex or the Freedom Unlimited. In year 1, it makes sense and you get a ton of value. In year 2, you have optionality and that escape hatch. If you are debating between the Sapphire Preferred and the Sapphire Reserve, we do have a calculator that should pop up if you Google CSP for CSR Ask Sebi. But yeah, it lets you change the numbers and calculate what makes sense for you based off your spend and how you value the points. The key point being that you actually get value and that it makes financial sense for you and your circumstances. On that note, if you want to learn about those 2 cards or pretty much any other cards out there and you want to support the channel, we have links on the website asksebi.com and also down below in the description box. As always, make sure the links are competitive, that the cards make sense for you, but otherwise it is a huge way to support the channel, so thank you guys in advance. If you made it to this point, leave a ring emoji, and I don't think there is a golden ring. I think it's just like an engagement ring thing in the comments down below, and I'll try to heart it and also respond. 3 questions. Number 1, are you comfortable with biometrics? Number 2, thoughts on the Visa all-in-one card? And number 3, what cards do you think are in Visa's path? Let me know and everyone else know in the comments down below. Big favor, thumbs up, consider subscribing, but otherwise, hope you liked it. See you next time.